All right, let's talk about what it would take to go from a rating of 400 to 600. And before we do so, I'd just like to say the advice I'm going to give here is specifically for the ChessDojo training program. However, everything that I'm describing you can do on your own. The dojo training program will simply help you do the things that I'm talking about here. Okay, first thing we have to address is what do we mean by 400 to 600? So let's get into it. And here is our rating conversion chart. We had to create this because there are several different organizations throughout the world, many more than we have just here, that have different rating systems that we have to translate to a base rating system. So we have 400 to 600, we're calling it FIDE, the international, but of course we're cheating because FIDE doesn't even go that low. But this is just our way to translate all of these different rating groups. So for example, 400 to 600 is 450 to 650 USCF, and the ChessCom and Lichess are inflated above that. Okay, now, one thing I want to stress is there is a difference between 0 to 400 and 400 to 600. And I'm thankful to say that I've been teaching long enough to kind of see it. And we're going to talk a little bit about it. I have a young friend. He's a kindergartner, and he had his first tournament this weekend, and he came out of there with a provisional rating of 421. And so he's just on the cusp, that was USCF, so just on the cusp of breaking into this second rating band. Okay, now what I'm going to say is the main difference is getting better at the two things I discussed in the first video of 0 to 400, namely getting better at the dimension of time. So to repeat, there are three dimensions: material, time, and quality of position. And to get up to 1,000, the easiest way is to master this first dimension of material, to be a miser, a stingy miser with your material. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then number two is to learn to think long. That is, to be able to really sink into a position and consider it. And it's like a muscle that has to grow and be developed. And it's not easy. For example, my young friend this weekend, I told him to sit on his hands. And he did so a little bit, and I think he got a little bit better with thinking long. But it's hard. It's also hard because your opponents will also be moving fast, whether you are a kid or an adult. Kids, you might think, have a harder time moving slow. But you'll see with adults as well, there's a kind of urgency it feels like an urgency to make a quick move. And I feel it too. And the way I would describe it, if you want to think of it as a physical phenomenon, if you imagine playing basketball or something, and let's say you're a little exhausted, you're not going to drive into the paint. No, you're going to take that easy, lazy shot from the outside. And that's what it's like too if you just play the lazy, intuitive move instead of really delving into the position and trying to work it out as best you can. Okay, so what we have in front of us here is the cohort, the dojo cohort for the 400 to 600 group. And as you see, there's a bunch of different ratings, but as said, the ChessCom Rapid, which is the most common one that people use, is inflated. So we've translated it to this baseline rating that we have. Okay, and let's get into it and think about how their progress relates to the requirements that they have to do. You can see here we have a variety. We've just been here a month and we already have a gain of 15, some winning, some losing, and that'll be interesting going forward to see how they progress. First thing to notice, we've got the famous maiden twos, and the first group, 0 to 400, just did 1 to 50. Second group is doing 1 to 306, right? Here is this big old tome. Oh my gosh, it's even hard to open. There it is. There's some maiden ones. You do not have to do it as a book. You can also do it on Chessable. You can do it on Kindle. You can do it on Forward Chess. Many different ways to do it if you don't like books. Then we have FCW, that's First Chess Note Workbook. And what is it about? It's about taking pieces and not losing pieces. That's what it's about. And that's a little bit longer than the first group has to do, right? And then also PR is Puzzle Rush with 5 minute and then Survival. A little bit higher numbers than we have in the first group. This is just a way to get better at it and also to gauge your tactical skill. Then we have the end games. The most important end game is to mate with a queen. Queen and king versus king. Why? Because like with 0 to 400, your best strategy at this point in your chess career is to take stuff, be a miser, trade everything down, and then mate with the queen. That is your path. And then you can worry about other aspects of the game later. Okay. Then we've got classic games to look at, a game to memorize, the opening principles. We'll maybe talk a little bit about opening principles in a second. And then the most important thing, we've got the classical games and postmortems that you can see people are knocking off here. Also to be noted, we see his comment on someone else's analysis and a review with a higher rated player. I'm going to talk a little bit about that when we look at our sample game for today, which will help us explain what players in this group need to do. Okay, so here we go. And this is a game played between two of our players. And let's take a look at the opening here. So bishop c4, honestly, it's funny because if you tried to learn the Sicilian, this move wouldn't come up too much. Like let's say you did some big chessable course, this move wouldn't come up too much. However, if you're playing the Sicilian at this level, you're gonna get it all the time. Which speaks to a bigger question, which is, don't worry about the openings yet. Don't worry about the names of the openings yet. If you make principled opening moves, you will be making GM moves. So for example, let's read this comment here after c5. I don't know the Sicilian, but neither does my opponent. ... probably. So here's the thing. What's going on here is people are obsessing about openings way too early. And they know that here at the dojo, they're not supposed to be thinking about openings until later. So one of the great things I really like about our program is we are telling you when to start thinking about certain things, i.e. when to, develop something like your openings. Now isn't the time. Now is not the time. And these people need to learn how to trust me. And one of the cool things that we have built into the program is this principle of plus minus equal. The equal is the cohort, and they're going to be playing against each other, sparring against each other, working with each other. But then also people above and people below. And so, for example, we have here a guy named Real Raptor, who I believe is in the 1200 to 1300 group, who is doing some explanations that we'll get into in a second. It's a key part of our program, and it should be understood that it's not simply something that Real Raptor is doing for the benefit of those below him. No, it's great for Real Raptor to be articulating his own thoughts about the position. And we could say, well, maybe we want someone more fancy than Real Raptor. No, Real Raptor's definitely much stronger than these guys. And we'll actually listen to some of his thoughts in a second. But it's for him of great benefit to try to articulate those thoughts. Okay, so again, at this level, do not be focused on the openings. And the reason you're tempted to is because it feels like you're in possession of some kind of incredible weapon if you have some kind of opening theory. Trust me though, at this level, it is illusory. Okay, bishop c4, knight f6, mistake. Let's read what Real Raptor says. e6. The standard response is e6 in order to blunt possible sacks on f7. In general, just to blunt the bishop. Yes, right? And knight f6 is a real problem because e5, at any point now, could be a real disaster for us, kicking the knight away from the center. Knight c3, g6. I wanted to try the fianchetto thing. So notice that Boskirk here is getting distracted from the game itself by these highfalutin ideas that are not helping him. What he needs to be focused on is material. He needs to be focused on not losing anything and then calculating when the time comes. All right, white could play e5. White could still play e5. It would be crushing, honestly. d4, okay. Bishop d2, totally strange move. No one gets it. Knight g5, totally strange move. No one gets it. Now, as we're going to see in these games, people are hanging stuff, and that is how these games are being decided. So, a very simple question here for black is, can I take the knight on c3? And why doesn't he do it? Because he's worried about the pawn on f7, right? But he can. He can do it. Thank you very much. If bishop takes, I just move the king. And if knight takes, I can play queen c7 or take on the bishop on d2 with check. Thank you very much. So instead he castles. And notice this decision is driven out of fear, okay, and not based on what I want this group to really be focused on, which is stealing stuff. Because your opponents will give you the things. They will give you them. And then when we are analyzing our games, right, the heart of the program, our main concern is, how could I have been even more stingy? Later on, we will cultivate our game develop out of the stinginess routine. But for right now, as you can see, we need to be focused on the material. Bishop f7, and yes, we can take that thing. Thank you very much. Now, knight d5, and now an interesting thing happens. Knight takes d5, e takes, and now h6, and white plays a great move here, bishop g6, and black doesn't think long enough here and plays hg, and then check to the miserable king. It's going to be mate next move. So, a very typical game at this level, and I want to stress then two things. The reason why my young friend got to be 421 instead of 450 and above, which is this next level of 400 to 600, again, 421 was just his USCF rating, is because he was not yet stingy enough and hadn't learned to sit on his hands. Now, even at this level, you will see that people will still be moving too fast. So it's still a skill. Both of those are skills that need to be developed. And I will say, especially in today's online environment, you will find people much higher rated, 1600s, 1700s, moving too fast because it takes work to think deeply. And when you're online, especially, myself included, it is very difficult to have a deep thought because there's so many things out there ready to distract you. And again, thinking long is difficult. And even if you want to be a good blitz player, I really want to stress this, you need to do deep thinking so that your mind gets accustomed to tactical patterns that are a little bit difficult at first, and strategical ideas, evaluations. All these things will come faster after you've thought about them deeply for the first time. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there and simply finish by saying we're going to look now at the 600 to 800 group and see what the difference is there. And this dojo training program is a beautiful thing, but again, you don't have to necessarily do the dojo training program. It's just something that's there to help you develop the things that we think are appropriate. But if you just follow the advice that we've covered here, you will get to that 600 level. Okay, till next time.